Welcome to Stars Aligned. I'm Mayank Chhaya. From time to time, we have the privilege of welcoming guests whose name alone is the most comprehensive introduction to their professional accomplishments. This Sunday morning, that privilege flows from Shabana Azmi, arguably one of India's greatest artists who established her extraordinary credentials in her very first film, the 1974 Ankur, directed by the much celebrated Shyam Benegal. In the nearly 5 decades hence, she has routinely reiterated her world-class actorly prowess in film after film and decade after decade. Bharat FM is pleased to welcome Shabana Azmi from Budapest in Hungary, where she's shooting for Steven Spielberg's executive-produced live-action science fiction series Halo, based on the video game franchise. Miss Azmi plays the character of Admiral Margaret Perengoski. Shabana Azmi. It's a great pleasure to have you on, Miss Azmi.
Thank you.
This is a little bit of a broad interview, so I will go back a little bit. I hope you don't mind it because that's the format. Mr. Akhtar had a great conversation along those lines with us. So how do you think the fact that you were born to intellectually refined, progressive, and left liberal parents inform your career choice, and within that, the way you navigated the film industry?
I think they had a very large role to play in the person that I became and the choices that I made as an actor. Because my parents believed that art should be used as an instrument for social change. And that is something that I imbibed from them almost by a process of osmosis. So the fact that I had the parents that I did, I was lucky enough to have them, then the fact that I was a trained actor from the Film Institute, and also that I started my career with Shyam Benegal, I think these were the very strong formative influences on me. Because what happens at the Film Institute at that particular time, we had a chance to be exposed to the best of international cinema, which was not available at all in India at that time. And so, you're a young 20-year-old and you're watching Kurosawa and Godard and Ingmar Bergman, apart from Ray, of course. And that just does something very magical to your aesthetic. And the fact that I started with Shyam Benegal also had a lot to do with that, I think. And had my trajectory not started with Ankur, I think my career would have gone another way.
Right, right. What are your earliest memories of your remarkable parents? Because they had a very socially active life in terms of their ideological thinking. And you grew up in a, as I said, very informed, very politically conscious background.
Till the age of 9, I lived in a commune with my parents of the Communist Party called the Red Flag Hall. And all of us had, all the comrades, there were 8 families who had just one room each, which was anything between 180 square feet to 200 square feet. And 8 families shared one toilet and one bathroom. And money was never around because all the money that my father was earning, the Communist Party gave him only 40 rupees a month from that. And then, of course, when the children came, then my mother had to start working too. So she then decided to become a radio announcer with Bharati. And then after that, she progressed to Prithvi Theatre and then IPTA, and that's how it all started. So it was an extremely beautiful childhood. The fact that we didn't have any money didn't seem to matter at all. For us, what was beautiful is the celebration of India's pluralism, the fact that we would celebrate all festivals, Holi, Diwali, Eid, Christmas, with gay abandon. And that although religion didn't play a part, of course, because we were communists, I mean, my parents were communists, but they embraced the cultural heritage of India. So I grew up in the lap of the Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb.
जी.
So That's what happened. It was also an unusual childhood, let me say, because gender equality was given. You know, more than 70 years ago, my father wrote a poem called Aurat. It's an iconic poem in which, at a time when people used to say that, a woman's place is in the house looking after the kitchen and the children, he said, um, awake, my love, you must march along with me. Put meri jaan, mere sathi,
Ji.
arise, you have to march along with me. In which he said, Zindagi जहद में है सब्र के काबू में नहीं
Ah,
नब्ज हस्ती का लहू कांपते आंसू में नहीं उड़ने खुलने में है निखत हमें येसू में नहीं जन्नत एक और है जो मर्द के पहलू में नहीं इस
wow.
रविश पर भी मचलना है तुझे उठ मेरी जान मेरे साथी चलना है तुझे
That's
so
extraordinary.
yeah, so gender equality was given. Now, this is an incident that I've repeated many, many times, but it's worth repeating. That, I was going to an English speaking convent school, and like everybody else, I wanted to have a blonde doll with blue eyes. And my father brought me, and I was all of 7 years old, and he brought me a black doll, a black African doll. And he told me, black is beautiful too. Now, I thought he was some kind of weirdo, you know. I quickly just hid the doll. I said, I don't know what he's up to, but imagine that is the way. That's why I'm saying that it was a process of osmosis. And the lives they lived by example gave my brother and me the values that we still.
Right, right. That's interesting. I'm sorry to travel back a little bit more in terms of where did their influence come from, your fathers and your mothers, because we're talking about several decades ago.
But because by the age, see, my father belonged to a zamindar family in a tiny little village called Mijwa in
Right.
Azamgarh. Uh, he belonged to a zamindar family, but my grandmother used to say he was always different. On Eid, he would not wear new clothes because the Kisan children, the farmers' children, could not afford new clothes. So
I
he was
see.
different from the rest of the family. Then it was very interesting because you see he wasn't given an English education because three of his sisters died one after the other of TB, and it was believed that bad luck uh, was coming to the family because the brothers before him were being taught English. So,
Oh,
of all things on earth, he was sent to a madarsa. Now, in the 6 months of going to the Sultanul Madaris, he formed a union and had a strike and then was thrown out of that place within less than a year. And then after that, he found his way to Kanpur, where he started working with shoemakers and would write this fantastic poetry and send it to the communist paper, Qawmi Jang. And then Sardar Jafri and Sajjad Zahir found out his whereabouts and called him to Bombay. And so at the age of 19, he became a card holding member of the Communist Party, which was a complete reversal of everything that he had grown up with, which was the sense of entitlement of a landlord's
right,
family.
right.
My mother came from a, a better off family. Her father was an excise officer, so they had these government bungalows and they had many, many more privileges. And in fact, when my father went to my nana to ask for my mother's hand, he said, देखो आप कम्युनिस्ट हो और शौकत बहुत लाड़ से पली हुई है so she will be proved to be a very expensive wife. So I don't think it'll be really something that will work for you. And this little 19-year-old spiritedly said that even if he were a mazdoor, मैं अपने सर पर मट्टी ढो के उनके साथ मजदूरी करती लेकिन शादी तो मैं सिर्फ इन्हीं से करूंगी. And
That's
then story becomes really extraordinary because the people in her family, she was engaged to be married to somebody, and her family got very, very angry about it, particularly her brothers and her sisters and all of that. But she said, I'll marry. She broke up that engagement and she said, I'm only going to marry Kefian, otherwise nobody else. So imagine this grandfather of mine, Yahya Khan, who was a five-time namaz padhne wale insan, five times used to pray in a day. He told his family that, Shaukat is very um, sort of distressed, and so I'm taking her with me on tour. And he brought her without knowledge of the family to Bombay, took her to the commune where my father was staying,
Really?
and said, "You see for yourself what kind of life they are living. And if you think that you can make do, then he got her married there without telling the rest of the family,
Oh, really?
and went back and then just said, "Well, I've got her married. What do you want to do about it?" Now, how revolutionary is that? And at that marriage, there was not even one single progressive writer who was not there. I mean, there was like Josh and Sajjad Zahir and of course Sardar Jafri and Majaz and Majru and the whole lot of them. And then
Right.
she very vividly she's written a book called Cafe or Man, Cafe and I, in which she talks about how they were so young and how they embraced independence and what all it meant, and is just quite very romantic by
It is.
by
It is.
comparison. I mean, it was really an extremely romantic marriage that they had.
Right. Given the constraints of our time, I'm going to jump a little bit to a question that's been in my mind for a very long time. I've known you for a long time, but I've never asked you this, and I'm very curious. You grew up in the shadow of a great poet and a great lyricist. What are your memories of him as a lyricist, especially because, for instance, when you were 9, Kaifi Saab wrote "Waqt ne kya kiya kya hasi sitam." When you were, I think, 14 or so, Hakikat. Then came Anupama, Kuch
Yeah.
Dil Ne Kaha. Then came Pakiza, Chalte Chalte. I'm just jumping eras, but I'm curious to know whether you ever, at what point you became conscious of the quality of his writing.
I was always conscious of his quality of poetry, never of his lyrics, because he never brought his film work home. And in spite of the fact that we had people like Gurudev and S.D. Burman and um, Chetan Anand and all of them coming to our home was much more peopled with theatre and literature. So uh, I when my mother was working with Prithvi Theatre, my father would take my brother and me, who were little kids, with him to the mushaira because we couldn't afford a maid. And so we would go to sleep on the stage behind the big white Gautakyas. And
Right.
then we would wake to thunderous applause and then look at each other and say, okay, so Abba's on stage. So we knew that he was a very beloved poet of the times. Obviously, we didn't understand his poetry, but we knew that he was a much celebrated poet. It is only later that I realized what an exceptional lyricist he is. And when I did Earth with him and when he wrote that beautiful ghazal, कोई ये कैसे बताए कि वो तन
Right.
वो जो था वही और किसी का क्यों है,
Right.
यही दुनिया है तो फिर ऐसी ये दुनिया क्यों है, यही होता है तो आखिर यही होता क्यों है। अब मुझे लगता है इतनी सादगी से इतनी डीप लाइंस कह देना अपने आप में बहुत बड़ा आर्ट है। एंड कैफी हैड you see, Kev was a very contradictory person because here he was this revolutionary, but at the same time he was a romantic. He was a very romantic man. And in his case, they were not conflicting with each other, but going along with each other. तो उनके जो गाने हैं उसमें वो जो जिसको कहते हैं ना एक गीलापन होता है.
Right. Right.
That is what his lyricism comes from, that tenderness, from that warmth, uh, from that ability to surrender, which is, I mean, I really do think he's an outstanding lyricist.
No, he is truly among the greatest ever. I don't think there's any debate on that. When you hear his songs now, I'm a song fanatic for a long time, and I'm into words all my life. So I know what your father did, and it's people need to see what he did. I was playing about 50, 80, 100 songs yesterday, all of his great hits, and I was struck by the sheer range of what he wrote. Anyway, the next is, how did the choice of acting as a career come about? Was there a specific trigger, or it was just in the air for you?
I think it was because of my mother being an actress with the Prithvi Theatre. And during my holidays, she used to take me along with her on tour. And Prithviraj Kapoor had made clothes uh, for me as a little baby. I was about 3 or something. And on stage, in the group scenes, my mother would take me also. So it was really, it became my playground. The theater became my playground. And then uh, when so in school, I was always playing boys roles because it was a girls school, but I was acting every year. And then when I went to St Xavier's College, we discovered that although there was a very active English theatre group, there was none for Hindi. So Farooq Sheikh, who was 2 years my senior, he formed the Hindi Natya Manch, and where inevitably we would get best actor, best actress, best play, best direction. And so it was in college really that I started feeling that this is something I would like to do. I had also watched my mother in fascination when she used to prepare for her parts, because for days before she went up on stage, she would dress up like the part. She would change her voice. She would change her gait. And she was very obsessive about learning her lines. And it was a very beautiful morning ritual that my father and she would be having tea in the morning, and he would take her cues
Ah,
and he would rattle her lines. So then I remember I went up to my father and I said कि अब्बा मैं एक्टिंग सीरियसली करना चाहती हूँ तो क्या आप मुझे सपोर्ट करेंगे. So he said, Bete, I will support you in whatever it is you choose to do. If tomorrow you tell me that you want to become a cobbler, if you want to become a mochi, I'll support you in that, provided you tell yourself that you will try to be the best mochi in the business. I
right.
will. So to have that kind of support was just absolutely amazing. And then I went to the Film Institute and very soon got the Atmaram scholarship and then passed out with a gold
Right.
medal. And before I knew it, I was in movies. I had no period of struggle at all.
You were probably 22, 23 when the process of Ankur casting began,
Yeah.
Shyam Benegal's iconic film. What do you remember of that in terms of the way you were approached, the way you were asked? Were you asked to audition, for instance?
Uh, you see, on those days, Zarina Wahab, who was my classmate in the Film Institute, and because she was from Rajahmundry, she had no place to stay. So she was staying with us. A lot of my um, institute friends would come and stay with me till they found a house for themselves. Now, there was an assistant, uh, Deepak Prashar. He is Pankaj Prashar's older brother. And he came to ask for Zarina for Priya Tendulkar's part. And he saw me then and he said, why don't you come along and meet Sham? I had known him from college. Why don't you come and meet Shyam Benegal? And so I went having no idea what the film was about, nothing. And he just had one look at me, and for some strange reason, I was wearing a sari. I still have that sari, and I had a bindi, the typical look I had in those days. And he looked at me and he said, "How good are you at dialects?" And I said, "Which dialect?" And he said, "Hyderabadi." So I broke out into Dakkani because my family is from there. I was born in Hyderabad. So he said, "That's wonderful," and told me the story not only of Ankur but also of Nishan, and told me, "You'll be doing both my film." So I came home and I told my mother there's some fraud filmmaker I met. met. He said, do 2 films with him. And 18 days later, I was in Hyderabad shooting for Ankur.
Oh,
But what
really?
is very interesting is, you see, Shyam had faced a lot of rejection for that part of Lakshmi. He had gone to Wahida Rahman, she had said no. Then he had gone to Lakshmi of the South, she had said no. Then in desperation, he went to Anju Mahindru, and she also said
Really?
no, yes. And so by the time he saw me, he did feel that I was younger for the part than he had envisaged. But something had clicked for him. Now, I think about 1 week into my being finalized for the film, I went to meet him in the in his office, and I was wearing jeans. I used to be very thin in those days. I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and my hair just tied up, no makeup on my face and all that. And so Govind Nilani walked in, and he wrote to Girish Karnad and said, Shyam Benegal has taken a rat to play his lady. And I don't know what's going to happen. Now, of course, I had no idea about this. Then the second day we were shooting, I remember there's a scene where I come and sit in front of the grocer and I ask him to get something, and I think I'm just clearing my ear or something. And he came up to me and he said, I made a mistake. This is what I had told Girish Karnad, but you're absolutely wonderful. And we're very privileged.
Oh, how nice.
So that's how it
Nice. I do not mean to read too much into what could just be part of your normal craft, but I was watching the movie yesterday. About 15 minutes or so into the film, there is a scene where you, with Sadhu Meher, and Anant Nag arrives in that particular ramshackle place. I was struck by how subtly you crafted diffidence of that character, the way you stood, the way you walked with little bending, little forward in absolute obsequiousness. Was that a conscious process or it just came to you?
I can't remember. I
Oh,
really cannot remember, but I was a trained actor. Don't forget that. And I had been exposed to very, very good actors. I mean, Liv Ullmann was my absolute favorite and all of that. But you see, with Shyam, the process is very organic because it was the first time that I was ever entering a village. I had never set foot in a village.
I
So he
see.
told me, okay, now I want you to get into a sari and just walk around the village in the sari, because obviously I wasn't used to wearing saris. And from the first minute onwards, it was very interesting because the tailor came to take my measurement, okay? And Shama Zedi was doing the costumes then. And so he just looked at me from top to bottom. And he said, okay. They said, okay means how is he going to make my blouse? He's not taking my measurements. So Shama said, there is no way that a male tailor will take the measurements of a lady in a village. Forget about it. He looked you up and down, he'll make your blouse perfectly. And he did.
Really?
So right from the shock of that to the fact that वो मुझे मिर्ची कूटनी होती थी ना, so
जी
that
जी.
I would never get the rhythm. So all the village women would laugh at me and they would say, what is the point in your coming from the city? You don't even know how to do. And so I made friends with them. And then there's this oft repeated thing, which I won't go into detail, but I used to find it very difficult to sit on my haunches. And so Shyam Benegal told me, you have to sit on your haunches. We will all sit at the dining table and have lunch. You better sit on your haunches. And then finally, when he was convinced that I could do it okay, then he would say, all right.
I see.
It's just very, very organic what happened. So I cannot tell you how the craft that I used in that character, but obviously it has to be because she was so completely different from the world I had inhabited.
Right, right.
And from there grew a really, really very deep relationship with Shyam Benegal.
Right. Once again, it struck me that it was an immediately accomplished performance in the very first film. And then you do something diametrically opposite, genre bending, as it were, in Devanand's Ishq, 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 right? I mean, you're talking about Devanand, you're talking about Ishq, Ishq, Ishq. What was the transition like?
I think that I was just working on intuition, and it's only later that I understand that I did it. But because first I did Ishq Ishq Ishq, and the next thing I did was Fakira with Shashi Kapoor, which became a huge hit. And so suddenly I started getting roles in mainstream cinema as well, which is not what I had actually carved out for myself. And now I think that had I started with mainstream cinema, then I would have been compared to the reigning divas of that day, maybe Hema Malini or people like her, and I would have been at the lowest rung of the ladder. But what had happened is that Ankur had given me such status, and I'd won the national award, and then we went to Berlin, and in Berlin, then Richard Dreyfuss and my performance, him for the Americanization of Daddy Kravitz and mine for Ankur, came in for a lot of praise. So that was
Right.
all just very overwhelming, and then getting the national award, etc. But I think that gave me a status where, in spite of the fact that I was just starting, uh, really right in the beginning, I was suddenly made to feel at a parallel level. And I felt that it was important for me to also become a star in the traditional, conventional sense, because then I would be able to contribute much more to the art cinema that I was doing, a lot of it completely for free and a lot of it for
Right.
pittance.
Right.
And then at one point I was told, you're trying to ride both boats and you're likely to sink. But fortunately, the commercial films that I did also became successful, in spite of me, not because of me, but that gave me some weightage. And then I felt that I used to feel that there shouldn't be this huge separation between what is known as parallel cinema and the mainstream cinema. I used to feel they should really feed into each other, and which is what I see happening today.
Right. It's happening now. Yeah.
I'm very happy about that. And I would like to take some credit for people like Smita, me, Nasir, Om, etc. Because I think that it did create a sense of respectability amongst the people who were doing mainly commercial films to then maybe start aspiring for a national award, which was not going to happen if you are going to play a Miss Nita in a regular
Right.
commercial spoiler. And so then you have to make sacrifices. I mean, I remember my secretary used to be, you're giving 40 days to Shyam Benegal's film in which you're not even getting the signing amount of what you're getting for a commercial film. And you're giving him all the dates at one point. And I said, this you can't interfere with at all.
Right.
And then we did it really because we loved it. And there have been many instances, Mayank, where, for instance, we were doing a film with B.R. Ishara. And B.R. Ishara suddenly one day we realized didn't have the money to do the shoot. So Sanjeev Kumar and I pulled in the money
I
for
see.
him that schedule. Then even as late as 84, Vinod Chopra, I was going to do Khamosh with
Right.
him. And he just had an operation and he had to be sitting on a tire and it was very uncomfortable. And I got to know that he was traveling by third class train. So I bought his air ticket and I said he can't travel by third class train. So that was the kind of spirit of comradeship, I
Right.
think, that we had. And I feel sad that that has got lost somewhere along the
Right.
way.
Right.
But we really wanted to make a difference. We wanted a space to be created for the kind of cinema that we believed in, and were willing to go to any length for that. And it's not such a huge sacrifice, let me tell you, because as actors, we get the balance because then we are working in commercial films where we are getting huge amounts of money.
True.
It's the technicians, I think, who make the greatest sacrifice, because everything that they do, the work is the same and they are not getting compensated somewhere else. So
Right.
there is the greater
Right. Right. You mentioned Fakira, 1976. There was Parinay before that, I think. But besides the point, how did you warm up to something like Tota Mehna Ki Kahani To Purani Purani Ho Gayi. You come from, as I said, a deeply poetic background in the family. How
You
did
know,
you approach something like that?
I think that I had many inhibitions, and I was deeply conscious of the fact that here was I was this St. Xavier's College uh, person, Cafe Azmi's daughter, and why was I singing to these silly songs and stuff like that? And I think that awkwardness showed because it took me a very, very, very long time to get rid of it. You know, I used to be awkward, and that's why when I look at girls today who just come in and within 3 months of being in the film industry, they're dancing like complete pros and with such abandon. And I feel that that was a handicap for me because if I had decided to do mainstream cinema, then I should have gone whole hog. But instead, I used to tell myself, no, but Nargis couldn't dance and Nutan never used to dance. And you know, to hide
Right.
behind all those things instead of just facing it's something I can't do.
True, true, true.
Yeah.
I want to talk about a year later, especially because we're talking about the great master Satyajit Ray, 1977, Shatran Ke Khiladi, where you played Sanjeev Kumar's not somewhat, greatly jilted wife, because Sanjeev Kumar was carrying on affair with chess along with Saeed Jaffrey.
Yeah.
How did that role come about? Because you're talking Satyajit Ray within 3, 4 years of your starting the career.
You see, Satyajit Ray had seen Ankur, and in his book, Our Films, Their Films, uh, he said in the last scene, he writes in that book, in the last scene, Shabana Azmi pulls out all her stops and establishes herself as one of the finest dramatic actresses of the country, which was like unbelievable. I mean, it was Ray. And so one day I got a call, I think, from Shama Zaidi, and she said, Ray would like to talk to you. And of course, he called, and I went completely mad. Anyway, what happened is when I went on the set, I was like a mad girl, had gone in my jeans. And Manikda had one look at me and he said, okay, why don't you, because he hadn't spoken to me about what the scene was going to be like or something like that. He said, why don't you go and get dressed first and then I'll come and see you in the makeup room. And I found it very odd. I said, I'm going to start working with him and he's not telling me anything about the camp. And then it was so amazing because, the costume that I was wearing made me sit in a particular posture because the costume was such. And so by the time he came, I had changed from that slouchy urban jean wearing girl into somebody who was more stately. And he said, I didn't speak to you then because now you're in the correct frame of mind to
I see.
listen. My God, I can't tell you what that meant. And then when I went, he said, we'll do the more difficult scene first. And I said, oh God, that's very unfair. And then I did it and he said, very good. But you know what I think is that, yeah, all right, so I get the point that you're really hurt and angry with him. But why don't we do it so that it's somewhere it's angry, somewhere it's petulant, somewhere, let's give it a few shades. And that changed it completely. And then what was amazing is for some reason, Manik Dada didn't give any instructions to either Saeed Jaffrey or to me. But he would give very close instruction to Sanjeev Kumar.
I
Why
see.
he did that, but he did it completely differently. And after that, I used to keep telling him, but you have to cast me again because I kept up a very good relationship with him. But he said, no, I cannot believe that you can be a Bengali
I see.
speaking person. I said, no, that's not fair. But then I remember when he saw Khandar, then he called me and he said that he liked my presence, right? So I really wish I could have worked more with him.
Right. 3 films come from there. One is, of course, Satran Ke Khiladi. The second is Junoon, where you played Shashi Kapoor's, again, jilted wife because he is obsessed with Nafisa Ali's character. And there was Earth, where too you were a jilted wife, where Kulbhushan Kharbanda was carrying on with someone else. So My point is, these three interesting characters came to you. I'm sure it was happenstance. How did you approach them differently?
Oh, absolutely. Because in Junoon, I mean, we're talking about 1857, right? So she couldn't be given the feminism of today. She had
Right.
to be Firdaus. And I modeled her on a person that I knew who was called Firdaus, who would very easily uh, burst into tears, but really didn't have the ability to fight for her own space. And so she would swallow the jealousy. So she was completely different from the person I played in Ark. And Ark was made as we went along because it was an idea when we started. And the film, the scenes would be written on the set so
I
many
see.
times. Yeah, and it would just go along. And it was some magic happened between Mahesh Bhatt and me. It was like he knew how to touch all my triggers, all my buttons. So there was such deep understanding uh, between us. I have never had that experience again with any other director. The kind of same wavelength uh, that we were on. And Mahesh has this amazing ability to sometimes just use a word, just a word, and it can give you exactly what you need to do. And I talk about this a lot. You know, there's a shot in that song, तुम इतना जो मुस्कुरा रहे हो क्या
Right.
गम है जिसे छुपा रहे हो. तो उसमें एक सीन में वो मेरे हाथ में राजकिरण देखता है कि इट्स माय डिवोर्स पेपर्स. And by then, I had been crying for 2 days, holding my tears back because it takes 3 days to do a song.
Right.
And suddenly, I just froze. And I wasn't able to tap into myself anymore. And it was a close up of mine. And I remember just as the clap went, Mahesh said, "Look exposed." And now, when you see that particular shot after Rajkiran has seen that it's
Right.
my divorce papers, it epitomizes being exposed, you know.
Right.
So sometimes a director can give you a very lengthy instruction, or sometimes it can just be a word. But
Right.
Mahesh was wonderful to work with.
You know, in that film again, your father's song "Koi Ye Kaise Bata De," when that's being played, you are welling up and breaking down. You're practically shaking. I thought that was a remarkable piece of acting. Was that? Did you feel in the moment, or it?
You see, the thing is that we know when I'm working on Kafi's lines, the lines themselves are so strong and so beautiful that you have to do nothing except to just react. You don't have to
Right.
add anything with it. You're just reacting to the stimulus of your husband walking in with his mistress at a party where you're caught without anybody on your side. And so it came. But then the scene that happened between Smita and me, where I'm nasty to her, there was a problem because Smita said on the first day when we were supposed to do it, she said, "No, I don't think this scene is good." And then Baburam Ishara, who was a friend of ours, also came on the set and said कि जिस तरह की ये औरत है पूजा, वो इस तरह की साथ बात नहीं करेगी.
Acha.
I had prepared for that scene. The first day, her dress was not okay. So the scene, the shooting was cancelled. The next day, this started. And then Mahesh's wife, Pooja, not Pooja, what is her name? Kiran.
Kiran, yeah.
She came on the set. And I was in tears and I was saying, Kiran, they're all saying that a person like me can't speak lines like that. And she said, "Can't speak like that? उठा के थप्पड़ मारेगी उसको." And then I suddenly got my strength from that because I mean, I was based to a great extent on.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then we went ahead and did that, and I was
True.
very badly affected by that.
Much to your chagrin, you've been institutionalized now as an artist. I know you don't particularly like that, but do you think that weight of having been institutionalized distorts the way filmmakers approach you for roles now?
Yeah, I wouldn't say distorts. I wouldn't say distorts, but approach me with caution and will not offer me anything that is flippant, which I think after 40 years in the industry I deserve. That
Right.
you do approach me with flippant roles. So I don't get that. But I have been lucky. I've been at the right place at the right time. So I started with Ankur and the parallel cinema movement. Then in '89, I moved to Hollywood with Shirley MacLaine and John Schlesinger. And then with Roland Joffe. And so it's been a beautiful ride. It's been a beautiful ride. And now I'm getting all kinds of parts, wicked parts, funny parts, parts different from the rather honorable kind of person
Right.
I was in my hey days. So I'm enjoying it. And I think the OTT has also created a space for the older actors, both male and female. And today, I really do not need to do anything except that I'm game for it. There's no other consideration because see, when you're building your career, then you have to think of this might be good for my career. Well, this is a good production house. You know, other considerations than
Right.
just
Right.
role. But today, only very good money can attract me, or a really different part, or if I feel um, an important thing is being said and the young director needs my support.
Right, right. Last three questions, I'll wrap it up. All two relate to your co-stars and one a broad one. The first one is I've read in a few places that Rajesh Khanna, with whom you did 7 movies, was perhaps your favorite co-star. Is that an accurate thing? Because these are the quotes that I keep
No,
reading
I
about.
never say. I wouldn't say my favorite co-star, but he and I got along, and I was never privy to any of his famous mood swings. Uh, with me, he had, I think he believed that I was a lucky mascot for him. And we did many successful films together. But my favorite co star by far has to be Nasiruddin Shah, with whom I did 10 films.
Right.
You know, he was so amongst my co-stars. Rajesh Khanna was a popular co-star. Shashi Kapoor was one, and Vinod Khanna from the mainstream cinema. I
Right.
mean, I did a film with Amitabh and I did a film with Dharmender, but they were just one of.
Right.
The pairing used to be that.
Yeah, I mentioned Rajesh Khanna because I knew him for more than a quarter century extremely well. And we used to talk about all kinds of things. And when I mentioned you, he lit up and this is what he said. He said, I felt most warmth as a human being with Shabana.
He used to feel we had a very warm relationship, and like I told you, didn't I was never privy to any of his moods. I think he was like a pal with me. He was very comfortable with me, and I with him.
Right, right. Another peer that I want to talk about a little bit is, of course, Smita Patel. You had such parallel careers. You were peers. You both come from parentage which was socialistic in their outlook, very socially conscious, very politically aware. And yet, I mean, I'm sure you've been generous enough and candid enough to acknowledge some of the tensions that the two of you had. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I've spoken about it quite a lot, and it I think was a real pity because given that we had such identical backgrounds and that we were launched uh, by the same filmmaker and were in public memory almost siblings. I remember I went to Pakistan and not a single person talk to me without saying, आपकी फिल्में और स्मिता पाटिल की फिल्में, आपकी फिल्में और स्मिता पाटिल की फिल्में. I came back saying that in their mind, I could well be Shabana Patil and she could be Smita Azmi. We were so closely linked. But of course, we had tensions and we tried to make up sometimes. Sometimes we were not nice to each other. I was uncharitable with her. I regret that. I wish that uh, we could have bonded in
Right.
sisterhood. But what is very beautiful is that my relationship with her family has been fantastic. And her relationship with my mother and my brother used to be fantastic. So it didn't sort of pair out like that, which was great.
Right, right. What do you think of her artistry as a fellow artist? Obviously, she was a remarkably compelling performer.
You see, first, she had an extremely arresting face. The camera just loved her face. She had these wonderful eyes that she would just look and you could see fire coming out of that. That was a big, big advantage to her. She had a very short career. I mean, she could have had a really long career, but it is to her credit that having had such a short career span, 40 years later, you cannot talk about parallel cinema without mentioning Smita Patil. That's totally to her credit and her talent.
Right. And finally, how do you look at the current state of affairs within the Hindi film industry, especially? I mean, I've never seen this kind of ferment before on any number of subjects, be it related to clinical depression among some artists, or suicidal tendencies, or drug abuse, or even ideological fractiousness. What do you think is going on?
Well, I think there is an upheaval that is happening. A lot of it is due to social media and the anonymity it offers people to say anything, and also this need to be in the public eye. What gets lost is, I think, enough attention is not being paid to mental illness. Out of all of this, I think the lesson we should learn is that in our country and in our society, mental illness is treated even now with stigma, which it should not be. So instead of going on the correct trajectory, we have gone into sensationalism and all kinds of things that are happening, which are very unpleasant. But I think, at least I hope, that it should pass. Uh, this kind of concerted hatred uh, towards the film industry, I find it difficult to believe that it's organic. I think it is a construct.
I see. I see. And finally, you are in Budapest. What project brings you there?
I am doing a web series based on the very famous game Halo, and it is being produced by Steven Spielberg's company and Microsoft. So it's a great conglomeration, and there's Pablo Schreiber in it, and there's Natasha um, McLoin, and some very, very good actors. And I'm having an absolute ball because Budapest is a really beautiful city. Unfortunately, it's gone under lockdown. So, except for work, we are not being able to do much more, but it's a very beautiful city. And I'm
And
happy.
before I let you go, on a somewhat lighter note, because I had asked Mr. Akhtar too, and it's a question that both of you have been asked many times. You married to, in quotes, a very romantic figure in his writing, at least. And I could tell from the get go that he wouldn't be a romantic person in terms of his personal interactions with someone like you. He laughed about it. He said, Shabana thinks I have not a single romantic bone in my body. And I
Yes.
think you've talked about it. What's with that?
Well, I think basically Javed is a I don't know, he's a contradiction, because he used to be not emotionally very expressive. But now, as he's growing older, he's becoming emotionally much more expressive. gets moved to tears very quickly. When he was young, then I think it was anger that was triggering him on, and that you could find in his. I'll tell you a romantic thing that he did, and but which was, I think, the only
Please.
romantic thing that I've had. Once we were traveling, and I suddenly saw a small flower shop, and I said, "What beautiful flowers!" And he stopped the car and he bought the entire flower shop. So, and we had just a small little Fiat at that time. We were still not married. So the flowers were sort of coming out of the dicky, coming out of everything. He just bought the entire. I was
Really?
so overwhelmed. I have a huge thing about flowers. Huh? Flowers are my weakness. Now, a few weeks later, we had a fight and had stopped talking to each other. So he sends me this शेर जिसमें मैं बिल्कुल पिघल के मर गई. It was not his own शेर, किसी पाकिस्तानी शायर का शेर था कि उसी मकाम पर कल मुझको देखकर तन्हा, उसी मकाम पर कल मुझको देखकर तन्हा, बहुत उदास हुए फूल बेचने वाले.
Wow, wow, wow. On that lovely, charming note, I think it's a perfect time to call it off for you. I know you have another engagement now. Thank you so much. I want to thank you for your time, and Bharat FM is extremely pleased to have you on.
Thank you, man.
I'll send you a clip, the whole video pretty soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye and all the best.
Bye-bye. Thank you.